All right, welcome to episode one of Saved by the Game. Today we're going to be talking about gaming before the internet.
Mm.
Gaming before the internet, man. Gaming before the internet age. What gaming was like before we had the World Wide Web. So I think it should be interesting. You remember those times, right? What it was like back in the '90s and not have the internet.
Just shy of AOL dial-up.
Yeah. I mean, so
Before.
the internet was around, but like not everybody had it.
No.
Like the rich kids had internet,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you had to go and like wait 30 minutes for a page to load and all that good stuff.
Oh man, I can't remember. I mean, there was one point where the internet was still fairly new. You had like Windows 95, and folks were just starting to blog strategy guides online. But before that, man, you had to go to your local game store to find out. I'm like, hey, I'm stuck. I mean, I don't know if you remember that back in the day, the Nintendo had that 1-800 number that you could call when you got stuck.
They did, bro. And it was like $4 a minute. Yo, I read up a mad large phone bill because I got stuck on a link to the past.
Oh, my mama wouldn't let me call nobody for that. Man. She's like, you better get through it.
My mom wasn't home at the time, and I was like, hey, you know what? This only take me like a minute, and it took way longer than that. And yeah, I got in some big trouble for running up the phone bill. But that was how if you got stuck, man, it was like word of mouth from your friends, or maybe if you got lucky, like Nintendo Power would give you the secret, right? It wasn't like it is now where if I get stuck in a game, I could just Google it, and there's a walkthrough on YouTube that tells you exactly what to do, where to go, all that good stuff, man. But back in those days, you didn't have all that.
No, you didn't. I mean, I can remember like the first time that I came across a secret in a game where you skip level was Mario Bros. 3. And the only reason why I remember, or I can remember figuring out this secret, is because I watched The Wizard. You remember that movie?
Yeah, dude, that's great. Yeah, that's crazy. That was literally like an hour and 30 minutes of product placement, bro. That was an hour-long Nintendo
it was
ad.
Straight Nintendo all the way across. Yeah. They had the Power Glove in there. They had the little pizza, the Pizza Inn arcade sit-down kiosk little thing where you could sit at the table and you're playing like Ninja Gaiden. I mean, they had every single, Nintendo game in the movie. That's what it reminds me of in terms of that was my first time coming across a secret in a game.
Bro, The Wizard. Mm-hmm. I remember that was I think that was the first actual gameplay footage, or that was the announcement of Mario Brothers 3.
Yeah.
Like they used that as to say, hey, Mario Brothers 3 is coming. Which, set the whole world on fire. I mean, that was crazy. That game, I remember there were shortages of that game and you couldn't get it. Back in the day, that was The Wizard. I forgot all about that.
That was like my first kind of video game tech style movie that I can remember vividly. I mean, the replay value back in those days was extremely high as a kid watching that movie.
Oh yeah, I wore the tape out watching it just because I was so crazy about video games back then. That's great. The Wizard. That's a great one. And it kind of reminds me too, there used to be commercials for video games, right?
Oh man,
the video game
commercials
were the video game commercials were kind of dope.
They were.
If you ever get a chance, there's YouTube channels. Go watch some of those old video game commercials. They're great. I mean, they're cheesy, but they're great, right?
I mean, to be honest, if you go back and look at the early, I'm talking about early 90s, 90, 91, 92, there was explosions, and even the toys were that way. Rock'em Sock'em Robots and all that kind of stuff. Hungry Hungry Hippos. And then right after that, you would run into a Nintendo advertisement for a game. You'd always see that, or a Sega game, depending on what part of the 90s you're in. You always had one of those popping up.
Yeah, that's true. And it's kind of like a lost art now, the video game commercial. Because nowadays, right, you'll get a teaser trailer for a game 2 years before it comes out. Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You get that. I mean, the commercial now is just they show gameplay footage and they show what console it's coming out and then the date. That's it. Done. It's very simplistic with the type of commercial that they do versus you got a bunch of kids or young adults running out and they got them in a scenario where it's like they're in the game and the commercial's just like, oh, coming this summer. You know, you had the movie trailer dude doing the like, you think you're bad rad is coming this winter. You know, you just stupid stuff you had, man.
But it was hype back then, though.
It was hype.
It would get you really hyped for a game. And I think, hype. You know, because even in like you get little snippets of gameplay in the commercials, right? Mm-hmm. But really like just the, what's the word I'm thinking of? The production value of the whole thing is what would really kind of sell you on the game. The game could be probably trash, and some of them were.
They were.
I remember the game's not like bad, but I remember seeing a commercial for this NES game called A Steinax, and like it's like a kind of a action platformer medieval type game. And the game is okay, but that commercial, I was like, this game looks incredible. I have to get it. And that's just kind of like a lost thing now. I mean, now it's kind of, you know, IGN will drop a trailer or you'll get like a state of play or something like that. It kind of lets you know ahead of time, man. And even for like video game reviews, you didn't really get that back in the day. Video game review consisted of looking at the back of the box or seeing if you wanted to play it, or hearing about it from a friend, or you know, in the Nintendo days, right? It was this thing. It was this thing, Nintendo Power.
Oh yeah.
If it got featured, whether it got featured in Nintendo Power. This is my actual original issue 1, by the way. This is actually mine from when I was a kid. Yeah, issue 1. But even that, like, it was hard to, I don't want to say trust it, because, you know, the game Who Framed Roger Rabbit got like a 6-page spread in Nintendo Power. That game was awful. Absolutely terrible. So you didn't really have a good source of, like, video game reviews, right? Like how you pick games now. Now, you know, 3-4 days before a game comes out, IGN's going to drop a video and give it a rating, and you know, okay, this game is wild trash. I don't need to go buy it. Or, you know, the Metacritic reviews are amazing, so you want to go buy the game. Back in the day, man, I mean, it was a crapshoot.
Like, yeah, or if you were lucky enough to go to a Blockbuster or a movie rental place, that was your only other option of testing out a game. And like, okay, am I going to ask for this one for Christmas, or am I going to, is this a play or pass type of situation? I mean, to be honest, back then, I really wasn't tripping, because it was just an opportunity for me to play a new game, you know, something different for, you know, the 3 or 4 games that I may have already had, and then want to play something different. Just having that option to do so, and it was cheap, and you don't have to worry about begging mom and dad for like, hey, I need, you know, $20-$30 for this game when it comes out, and they're not giving it to you. Like, man, where are your grades at?
Yeah. I mean, even $20-$30, but like, I remember N64 games being $70 when I was a kid.
They spiked
$69.99
big time. Yeah, it was like because after Super Nintendo, it was a wrap. It was like,
yeah. And that was the one thing about PlayStation, man. The games were much cheaper for a PS1 than they were for N64. I remember.
Yeah.
So I remember paying with my own little money like $70 or something like that for like, what was it, 70? I think it was 70 for Super Mario 64. May have been, because it wasn't even a pack-in title. I don't think. If you just gotta, because I just had the base system. It didn't come with the game.
Oh yeah, the base system didn't come with the game.
It didn't come with the game. And that's, you know, even like video game rules, man. Like I feel like the internet now, I mean, back in the day, you know, you like you said, you go to Blockbuster or whatever and rent games.
Yeah.
That was kind of your way of testing games out, right? But now, I mean, even you can test games out by like downloading demos, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, for, you know, once you got into like the PlayStation era, then you had the demo discs when those came out. So, you know, you had it for Xbox, you had it for PlayStation, and you didn't really have it for the cartridge-based games or anything like that. So and you also had the kiosks at, you know, your Toys R Us, your Kmart's, your
Yep,
Walmarts, if
Kmart,
you know
Walmart. Yeah.
Walmart, you had those kiosks there that you could play, and they'd have the Nintendo display or the Super Nintendo display, and they'd have that RAM pack or whatever they called it, where you could play 4 or 5 games and test them out and do it that way. So you always had that option too.
Yeah, I did a lot of that. Where my mom would go to Walmart, I would just run to the electronics and just play whatever they had back there.
Same,
Most
same.
of the time, for when it was the Super Nintendo, it was always either Street Fighter or it was Super Mario World. Those are like the only 2 games that they ever put in that kiosk at the Walmart near my house when I was a kid.
Street Fighter was popping, man, back then. Like I can remember my electronic gaming, was it monthly magazine, and they did that 15 16 page spread for Super Street Fighter 2, and they had like the 4 new challengers coming in. They had Fei Long and Cammy and T-Hawk and DJ. I was like, oh my god, this I can remember too, because when I got that magazine, it was, I think that was like an October or September October issue, if I'm not mistaken. And I went going into winter, still reading that magazine until even after Super Street Fighter came out. It visually, aesthetically, that magazine, that spread on just that one game was amazing. Like they just don't do stuff like that anymore. That just, they'll do like a 3 or 4 page spread, and someone who's just a blogger is just writing this massive biased article on a game. It's either, I like it or I don't like it. Back then, it was just, they were talking about every aspect of the game and why is it better than the previous 3 Street Fighters, the gameplay wise, which it was. Just the fact of having more characters. I mean, that was a huge memory to me in terms of before the internet. You had those magazines and they come in every month and you couldn't wait to crack it open. It was either going straight for the cover spread in the center of the magazine, or going all the way to the back of the magazine and seeing games that you normally wouldn't see in the store, and you'd have to call one of those 1-800 numbers to order some of those games. A lot of those were just in Japanese anyway.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, because the first game I ever pre-ordered was Ocarina of Time, but you couldn't just walk in and pre-order it like normal, or go online and pre-order it, right? I think it was I want to say it was EGM, may not have been EGM
or GamePro.
One of the two. I can't remember. I don't think it was Nintendo Power, but you had to cut this thing out in the back of it and take it to Funko Land. Remember Funko Land?
GamePro. That was GamePro.
Yeah, and that's how you pre-ordered the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time gold card. That's how I pre-ordered it anyway.
Yeah.
So I mean, just even that process back then, but yeah, it was way different. Like, it's really interesting, just how the internet age has just changed the way we consume games, right? Even so, let me ask you this: do you think the internet age, from a game development standpoint, do you think overall? I know neither one of us are game developers, but do you think it overall it's helped game development, or do you think it's hurt it a little bit, or a little bit of both?
I think the thing that's hurt the game development is the corporation itself. Is when, video games finally became the source of a business for a company. That's what hurts, because then you have people who generally at heart are not gamers, they're business individuals, and they run it as such. They set particular, roadmaps, timelines for a particular game to get released, to be completed, exact. And even if it doesn't get completed, they're still going to release it anyway, because at this point now with the internet, we'll just do a day one patch, or we'll do a patch within the next couple of months. You couldn't do that before the internet, because no one was on the internet. That game had to be finished. And if it was buggy and it wasn't finished, you had one of 2 options. And the second option wasn't very viable for a lot of different companies. The first one is that game's going to be complete, and it's going to be really good, and it's going to be well thought through, and it's going to be done well. The second one is, and on rare occasions where you have bugs, you could actually send the cart back to that, console company, whether it was, I don't know if Nintendo had that in certain cases. I know Neo Geo did for certain games where you could actually send it back to SNK and they would make modifications. One that comes to mind is Samurai Showdown 5, which was one of those where you could send it back and get a fixed version or an unaffixed version, kind of saying it like that. But it, for those of us that are in our early 30s, 40s, 50s, etc., that grew up in the beginning with Atari and Nintendo, a lot of us have been grounded to understand that when I'm buying a game, I want a complete version of that game, right? Yeah. I can remember you and I having conversations in the early ages of Xbox Live over why we should pay for DLC content, right? Why should I pay for this? Should already be in the game, right? And I think now we've completely shifted from where DLC has just become just a normal thing, and I'll just subscribe and pay $30 for a battle pass or this whatever series is done within the game, and now I got to drop another $30-$40. I'm like, I can understand that if the content's growing and the game's growing, but if you go back 20 years, that was not even thought of.
Not a thing. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, DLC is interesting, right? Before I get to DLC, I did want to mention one thing. So about if a game having bugs, right? Yeah, there in some cases with Neo Geo, like you mentioned, you had to send the game in if it was game breaking, right? But oftentimes too, like in the case of like Nintendo, say there was some like bugs or glitches that necessarily didn't break the game, but they wanted to fix them. Well, oftentimes they would fix it, and then as they produce more carts, to sell over the lifespan of a console, they're always producing and selling carts. Well, those later release carts will have a different version of the game, right?
Right.
They did stuff like that with, I think, Ocarina of Time. I was watching some speedrunners channel. They were talking about it. Like you want one of the earlier like 1.0 carts because there's some glitch you can do that like makes speedruns work versus later like 1.3 carts or 1.x carts where they patch that, right?
What game? There was another game on Nintendo 64. Now that you say that was released and it was extremely buggy. The cart was actually a different color itself. It was like a blue or black cart. I'm not sure if it was a wrestling game or if it was something else. I just can't remember it off the top of my head. But I remember like there was an issue or a bug within the game, and all the next generation carts were the cart itself was just a different color. So it wasn't like the blue or the black of what it was. It was just a gray cart. So that's how you knew. Like a lot of collectors now that are looking for stuff like that, the obscure games, they look for those versions because it has a higher value or collectible value, if you will.
Yeah, I'm not sure what game it is, but I mean, it could be a plethora of games, right? There's a couple of games on the N64 that have different color cards. I think like Killer Instinct Gold is one of them. There's a gray card, and then there's there's like a black one, I think, for Killer Instinct Gold, and there may be two different versions of the game. I'm not really sure. You can sometimes tell. Sometimes they'll have a version number like in the title screen.
Yeah.
And sometimes that'll be that'll be one way you can tell. But yeah, I mean, being able to patch games, I think has been a good thing for developers and a bad thing. Like you said, it does have you do get into things where games sit in early access for forever, right? And then you have the big day one patch where you get home, you install the game, you're ready to play, and then you got to sit there through a 30 gig patch or whatever to fix bugs and issues. So
that is you bring a huge point. The fact that back in the day, you buy the game, you go home, you put it in, and you're right in it. Versus having to download numerous gigs onto your hard drive, and you're sitting there for maybe, depending on how fast your internet speed is, you could be sitting there for 30 minutes to an hour waiting on your game that you've been waiting all this time to play, to download so you can start playing it. And I mean, there's pros and cons to both. For the generation now that don't know any different, it's not a problem. It's really not. For old school gamers like us, yeah, I mean it's we've become accustomed to that style of gaming now, but would I prefer having games that I don't need the internet for? You absolutely. Like I do miss games, even modern games now. I would like to have certain modern games where it doesn't require me to be on the internet. Yeah, I can understand if there's glitches or patches or whatever, but it shouldn't require me to be constantly on the internet to play it if it's just a one player game, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It's interesting though to see, one console that kind of you don't have a lot of that with is the Switch. Like you don't really have a lot of massive down day one,
No.
you know,
No.
pack like patches and stuff like that. The games are tend to be reasonably small. I think the biggest Switch game is around 14 gigs. I think Tears of the Kingdom will be the biggest one at 18 point something. Versus, I mean, like I downloaded Red Dead and it was 200 gigs or whatever. Now, graphically, Red Dead's a lot more,
Oh, of course.
demanding, right, than your
Yeah.
average Switch games, but you're still able to get, I finished Xenoblade Chronicles 3 recently, and I put like 160 hours into that game. It was a massive game, and it was 14 gigs, and I didn't remember having to download anything when I first booted it up. And if I did, it was negligible, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, and as far as DLC, I remember having that conversation with you about DLC and being mad about it. And now, it, it's weird. I'm on the fence about it. I think when you do DLC right, it's an okay thing. I do think that having some DLC can sometimes hold you over until you get the next version of a game, right? Especially if we're talking about a game series that doesn't release on any kind of regular cadence.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like it's 7 years in between game releases, and you want more of this game, but you can only beat it so many times. Having some DLC to give people some extra stuff to do. Maybe it was some stuff that they were working on that they just couldn't fit into the game because they have to make and they got to make they got a publisher behind them going, hey, you got to make this release date, and they got to make sure that they make that release date, and then the game isn't everything else they have in the game is stable and working. So I've kind of gotten a little giving people a pass, right? Especially when the DLC's good, man. Like for example, like The Witcher 3, their DLC that they had for that game was incredible. I think one of the DLCs got nominated or won Game of the Year. I think it got nominated for Game of the Year, and it was a DLC, which was wow. So if there's good value there for the amount of content you're getting, I'm not as mad about DLC as stuff like loot boxes and pay to win stuff that we get from games now,
Yeah.
which I just hate.
I'm not looking at that stuff. I think for me, if I have to think about, there's two games that I can think of that had really good DLC to me. Mass Effect, for sure.
Shadow Broker was dope.
Shadow Broker was insane
Yeah.
in Mass Effect 2. And I tell everyone out here that if you have not played the Mass Effect series, it is a high recommendation that you do so. They have remastered the game on our modern consoles now. No excuse to not play this game. The storyline's amazing. If you want to play it on the good guy side, you can do that. If you want to play it on the bad guy side, you can do that. You can play as a male, a female. You've got so many different options and choices that you can change within this game. I would say from a DLC perspective, back in the day, now when Mass Effect 3 released, there was a lot of actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, Mass Effect 3 was probably one of the first video games in the mainstream that pissed gamers off to the point to where it made it within gaming news, to where the publisher actually had to go back and drop a DLC to change the end of the game.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Man, I was pissed. I mean, pissed. I'm popping the P on that mug.
Yeah, really.
Pissed.
Like Draco Malfoy, Potter. Basically.
What do you mean, Potter? What do you mean, Potter? I'm talking about, bro. Man, I was like, I invested all these years playing this series, and it's been phenomenal. And my option at the very end of the game is what? It's what? And then you have the hardcores at the time that are going back and playing it in different ways to see if the ending changes, and it doesn't change a thing. And then BioWare comes out with the DLC later on that made it better. So now gamers who haven't played it, and very lucky few that have not played it and actually want to start playing it now, you're going to benefit from all of those headaches from those individuals that were raising their hands up and saying, "You're trash. How could you do this to us? We invested all this money in this game." Now the new remastered version will have that DLC version for your selections for your endings. I'm not going to drop any spoilers for any of them, so let that be known. But
I actually didn't play it until after.
Yeah. Oh man, and I've been telling this guy, y'all. I've been telling him for years that you need to play Mass Effect, and then he finally went back. I mean, by this time, Mass Effect was cold in the water. It was cold in the water, and he's like, "Oh my god, dude, this game's amazing." Yeah, I told you. I
binged all 3 of them in 2014. Yeah, so I got the good ending. So that's a good point, though. Back in the day, man, if you didn't like a game, like that just was the game. Like there was no, they weren't gonna patch it. You know, hopefully the sequel's better. That was basically what you were hoping for. So,
and you know what the funny thing about that is like you have a handful of those crappy games that before the internet, right? The cartridge-based games that now have become the obscure game to find,
the hidden gem.
The hidden gem for collectors, because it was a bad game, units didn't sell, right? And typically when a company says, "Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and take the loss here. There's no reason to have this particular game on the shelf anymore." They pull that, and those boxes, I know Walmart, and for sure, a lot of times if there's an underperforming game, they'll clearance it, and then they'll, damage it, toss it, and they'll write it off. And there's a lot of retail stores that do that. I think GameStop does something very similar to that. But and then you run into these scenarios now where you have collectors saying like, "Man, I can't find this game," or if you do find the game, you're paying a wad of cash for it, and you're like, "Damn, this game wasn't even good."
Yeah, that's true too. Because I mean, like I said, now we have access to so much information that it's kind of difficult for a game to not get any kind of press at all, right?
Yeah.
If it's even going to be remotely good. Like I said, back in the day, like in the Nintendo world, it was getting that feature in Nintendo Power, right? And Nintendo, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why you still to this day have people coming forward with like, "Oh man, I found this hidden gem on the NES," because your only way to really get like news about a game was word of mouth. Maybe you rented it, but even if you were going to rent a game, it wasn't often that you were going to rent a game that you knew absolutely nothing about, because like you gotta live with that game for 5 days. That's the only game you're going to be playing until at least for me, until you bring it back and get something new. So it was really interesting because you just couldn't. These hidden gems come forward now because they were not featured really anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like from the Nintendo side.
Yeah. And now, if you look at it if you flip it on the modern side, I can think of, there's not very many games now that aren't in the public eye when it comes to a physical release, right? I can think of one, for instance, like Babylon's Fall, right? Square Enix, you had created that game, last year, I think.
Something like that. Was it a PS5? No, it was a
PS4 and PS4 and 5. And I think Xbox, I'm not quite sure. It might not be. But the game was trash, right? Like trash. It was like super trash, to the point to where, the consumer, the gamer was like, "Bro, what the hell are y'all putting out? Like, how much time did it take y'all to develop this game?" To where they took it off the shelf. Like,
they shut the servers down, didn't they?
They shut the servers. It was 2 months in, they shut the servers down on this game. And I remember going to a GameStop just to ask, because I hadn't even heard about the game until I was just scrolling on YouTube and learned about the game, and I'm like, well, interesting. I mean, I like Square Enix. I mean, they've always made solid games. You know, RPGs have been great, even though that the gameplay and the setup for this game just wasn't good. I remember going into GameStop. I'm like, hey, do you have Babylon's Fall? I'm like, oh, we're not selling that game anymore. I'm like, wait, what? I mean, you don't even have a used copy? I'm like, nope. We're no longer carrying it. They told us to pull it off the shelves. So, me, being who I am, and for those of you out there, you're like, hey, man, why are you going to go buy a trash game? I did. I went on eBay and picked up a couple of copies of the game. And not to get graded, just to have. Because I have a very sneaky suspicion that we're going to come up a couple years from now, and there's going to be folks out there trying to do a complete PS4 set or a PS5 set or whatever. God. And Babylon's Fall is going to be that obscure game that got pulled off the shelf because guess what? It was trash.
Yeah.
And they're going to need that for their collection. And I'm going to use that as trade bait for an actual cartridge-based game that I might need in the future. That's what I'm going to do. But we weren't worried about stuff like that 20 years ago. We weren't worried about trade. The only trade we had was, hey, I got the new game and we're at school. Hey, I got that game. You want to trade for a week and I'll play this game. You play my game and we'll come back and we'll trade our games back. That's the extent of before the internet for trading for us.
Yep.
So
that's very true. Even to your point about hearing about games, I mean, even now, even though Babylon's Fall was obscured, whenever you go to the dashboard of your PS5 or PS4 or Xbox, and you go to the store, you can see what all these games. It's on the coming soon list. So you even at that point even know about it. Like you didn't have that on your old console. Like I said, you had to read Nintendo Power or EGM or hear about it, or see a video game commercial to even hear about the game coming out. And then even then, you may not hear about a game until it drops. So you see it in the store. You know what I mean?
Like, that was a lot of times. And then the whole review of the back of the box came into play.
Mm-hmm. Back of the box, like that was kind of like you had to read, like, okay, well, this game looks like it could be good, but
and you know what? To be honest, I wouldn't even say that the whole before the internet piece is mainly for cartridge-based games, because I'll be honest, I wasn't utilizing the internet for video game knowledge back then. Even around the PlayStation days, like the early PlayStation 1, the early Xbox, I wasn't, because even then I didn't actually shift into the online gameplay style of anything until like 2004.
Oh, same. Yeah.
That was like around that time. It was, I mean, and still from a Halo perspective, we're talking about the OG Xbox and the first Halo. It was LAN parties. It was like, you bring your CRT, I'm bringing mine, your big ass 175-pound TV. I need 2 other people to help me carry this mug inside the crib. Hey, don't look over your shoulder. Don't look at my TV. We're playing split screens here. Don't do me like
cheat. Yeah.
Fun fact here, folks. Fun fact for you guys. Me and G here, we actually did a LAN party. What was this? 2000.
Like 11. Probably.
It was like 11. Yeah, like around 2011. It was somewhere around there where we did a legit LAN party, no internet connection. It was Halo set up. We went straight old school. We had the link cables and all that stuff. And that was some of the best time playing. I mean, we've had tremendous times playing online, but just being in the same room and having that capability to just sit there and talk mess to each other in the same room and you're still playing the game on different screens, it's not something that this generation sees too much of now.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, even before the LAN party, it was, having a couple of buddies over playing GoldenEye, right? Because you had 4 controller ports on the N64.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was the thing. I wasted so much of my high school life playing GoldenEye Perfect Dark with friends, and yeah, that was your LAN party.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned like the PlayStation 1 era, right? Um, I remember, even then around that era, the 1995 to like 1998 was when the PS1 was really popular. And that was really also part of what I always like to call the golden age of RPGs, right? Like 1991 ish to like 2000, so mid 2000s. If you're an RPG fan, you were in heaven because it seemed like every couple of months there was a new amazing RPG dropping. Even though the internet was out, was out at the time by people, it was more being commonly used. Like I don't even think we had the internet back then. I don't think we did. So, you know, we had kind of graduated from Nintendo Power being the source of all things, and then the 1995 era became what I like to call like the Brady Games strategy guide era.
Oh man,
right? Like,
dude,
that's pretty much how when I got stuck, like that was pretty much what I went to, man. It pretty much became where when I bought an RPG, if I actually got to buy one, I bought it, and then I bought the Brady Games guide, buddy.
Bro,
this was how you played back in the day. Yeah,
I have so Brady Games was huge back in the day because it was super clutch. Because I've actually started repurchasing strategy guides for my collection, and there's still a handful that I really want in my collection just because they bring back so much nostalgia. I mean, I was wearing some pages out back in the day trying to beat certain bosses or find secret levels or weapons or whatever. Legend of Dragoon was one for me. This one was, and I'll be honest with you, my RPG game, that I got involved with RPGs late. Like I was in high school by this time when and all my buddies were playing. They had been playing Final Fantasies and all that stuff. I was like, for a majority of the time, strictly fighting games. So they helped me branch out. Introduced me to Metal Gear Solid and stuff like that. So, like my very first Final Fantasy that I legit beat was 10, if that tells you anything. And then I had to backtrack and play 7 and 8, Legend of Dragoon, Chrono Cross, stuff like that. But when the strategy guide piece came into play, it branched me into other stuff too. So then I started getting stuff for fighting games, like Rival Schools. I love this game. It was just different. It was a different fighting game, and it was still in like the Street Fighter universe because Sakura was in there too. And she was like a cross-play character where, she's going to school, so it's not summertime where she's off trying to chase Ryu. That's kind of my mentality, how I think about it. And then my last one, and I promise I'll stop. Xenosaga, Cosmos on the front.
That's a great game.
I used the hell out of this strategy guide for that game. The game was long.
Yeah,
it was
long cutscenes. Long cutscenes.
Oh my god! But you know what? It's probably one of the few. It's one of the few RPGs where the cutscenes don't get on your nerves to a point where, like, okay, dude, I'm ready to get back to the gameplay. Like Lost Odyssey on Xbox, too much reading, way too much reading. I was like, bro, this is horrible.
Yeah,
great game, but just
great game.
It's too much disconnect.
But yeah, the Brady games there. It was interesting though. The first, actually, I forgot about that. There's another company that made strategy guide, and Strategy Guides Prima, which is that Legend of Dragoon guide, was a Prima strategy guide.
Yep.
That's the other, and Brady Games is still, I think, making strategy guides to this day, because I think the last one that I bought was maybe Grand Theft Auto 5 or Red Dead 2, maybe been a Brady Games strategy guide. Yeah, they still make them. I mean, it's interesting. I feel like those 90s, that was kind of like the Brady Game strategy guide era, because before that, you didn't really get full-on strategy guides. You got them occasionally. Like, occasionally Nintendo would drop one for, like, I think you have, like, they drop a Nintendo Power episode or issue. that was for a game. Like I think you have the Ninja Gaiden one. Yeah.
Yep.
Or Ninja Gaiden 2. Yep. And they did a Super Mario Brothers 3. And then they would sometimes make their own, right? Like they made one for Super Metroid.
I actually had that back in the day.
And then there was this one for Chrono Trigger, which I don't know if Nintendo made this or if Square Enix made it, but this is kind of what you had to contend with. There wasn't really a company that was just making strategy guides. When you had Brady Games come along and, you know, they made a strategy guide for literally any and every RPG. So this was really the how I, you know, got unstuck from games. Even if it was a game I was renting, sometimes I'll be like, all right, you know what, the strategy guide's, you know, $9.99 or $14.99 at the store. I'm gonna go buy it because if anything, it's good reading material for when I'm able to rent this game again. Or, oh man, there was a secret that I didn't get. I'm gonna go rent that game again so I can actually go play through that secret area or what have you. So, yeah, that was an interesting time. Man. Interesting time.
The strategy guide for Street Fighter Alpha 2. Because I had it on.
They made one for that.
I had it. I had one.
Oh, what?
And they had it for at that time I didn't have a PlayStation yet, so the Street Fighter Alpha 2 that I was introduced to was on Super Nintendo. So it wasn't the greatest of ports. It was a little glitchy in sometimes, but
ran really slow. Too.
Really slow. But that game, that strategy guide helped me understand that Shin Akuma was going to be a secret character. Like you had to get you couldn't die through your entire series of whoever you're using. If you're using Ken or Ryu and you're going through your series of fighters that you have to face, and by the time you get to Bison, you can't lose. You cannot lose a round, and you had to get a certain amount of perfects for him to pop up. And it took me forever to get that good at the game, to a point to where I just started putting the game on the hardest difficulty and playing it. So that was my way of I would put it on the hardest difficulty and just play it for weeks on end at that level, and then drop it back down to normal mode. And I was murdering the CPU by then, and I was able to finally beat Shin Akuma.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that too, because you remember back in the day where there was all those crazy rumors about games, like the Street Fighter rumor that if you did a bunch of stuff in Street Fighter 2, Shen Long would become
my god,
yeah,
yes,
yeah. The reason I bring that up is because now there's a rumor about a video game in the internet era, it can easily be debunked in seconds.
Oh yeah.
Because somebody's already tried it, right? But I feel like a lot of those old video game rumors back in the day really got perpetuated because there was no way to really validate if they were false. You know what I mean? And then Nintendo Magazine wasn't gonna debunk it because it sold more games. More people were gonna go buy their game because they thought this thing would happen. It was interesting, man, because you could debunk it.
Wasn't that the reason why Akuma got originally introduced to Street Fighter? Because he was there was this quote unquote secret character, and he didn't show up until they did Hyper Super Street Fighter 2 or something like that.
Yeah, the whole Shen Long rumor started because of a mistranslation.
Yeah.
He was supposed to say you must defeat my Dragon Punch to stand a chance.
Right.
And it said you must defeat Shen Long to stand a chance. So people were like, oh, that's a secret character. And the rumor just started I want to say that some magazine, I'm going to have to look this up, even had doctored photos in it of supposedly Shen Long.
Yeah. There was a couple.
Which would later be Gouken in Street Fighter 4 is basically that character.
Yeah.
But yeah, those rumors, those rumors went around the playground. Now that doesn't happen because you can easily just,
debunk it.
Someone's debunked it.
Yeah.
Or not debunked it, or confirmed it.
Yeah.
Right? Some of those, one long-standing rumor I remember that actually ended up being true was, I think it was for Super Smash Brothers Melee. You could play as the final boss, which is this giant hand.
Oh, yeah.
There is a way to actually do it. And someone proved it. It was a rumor for a long time, and it got proven thanks to people on the internet.
There was a rumor, and you know what? This was my first time using the internet for trying to figure out if it was true. So Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, the first print, so the one that Bandai made, so on PlayStation 1. This was the first English-made Dragon Ball that came to the console, right? You had Ultimate Battle 22, but that came later after the fact. Bandai made that one too. Well, you can drop a code at the beginning of the entry screen for the game, and that unlocks like all the different versions of the characters through Z and GT and stuff like that, right? And then if you beat the game a certain way, Super Saiyan 4 Goku pops up. The thing about it is Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta never in the game, but the baby Vegeta is, right? So he's like in the Ozaru, the big ape form, but he's always the final boss. So there was this huge rumor going around that you could unlock baby and play as him. So you play at this huge ape version form of Vegeta in the game. And there was also like you had to play the game 10 times. You couldn't die. You had to have a certain amount of perfects to unlock Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. Mind you, I spent weeks trying to get this done, and I finally hit all the mechanics to get it down to the square end, and I got to it, and then it says go to the credits, and then you'll start another game, and then in the character select screen, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta is going to be there. He wasn't there. I was pissed.
Oh no,
pissed. And this was all over the internet, fool. There was blogs where they had like all the secret techniques. All that was true. All of that was true. Just the baby and Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta was fake. That was fake news. I was like, damn. I stopped playing the game after that.
I stopped playing the game.
Tripping.
Oh man, yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of those rumors. I remember hearing a lot of rumors. The same, you know, the Shenlong one. I forget some of the other ones that we heard. The jumping over the flagpole, Super Mario Brothers one was a big one. Yeah. I think that ended up being true, if I remember right. I think it is true.
I've never been able to jump over it, but
I've never been able to do it either. But I think the rumor actually is true. Well, yeah, you could jump over the flagpole. I think it's like in World 2 or something like that. But that was a big rumor when I was a kid. Like, yeah, I could jump over the flagpole. It's easy. You know, no problem. I could do that. Sure you can, buddy. Like, okay, whatever. So what do you think the biggest difference is now from the way you tackle games now versus the way you tackle games in the internet age?
I mean, life's different now. I'm older, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a completely it's not an apples to apples. It's more like an apples to bananas kind of scenario because you know I have a job and steady income coming in to where I can, for the most part, buy pretty much any video game that I want, right? Outside of select few games, and I have the visibility into stuff that a lot of it I didn't have when I was younger, right? I mean, Neo Geo, I'll just talk about that because I'm a big collector of Neo Geo stuff. Only saw in the back of the magazines. Never saw a commercial. Never physically saw one in a store. But I saw Sega Genesis. I saw Super Nintendo, PlayStation. I saw all those. I mean, I didn't even really see a TurboGrafx that I can remember. I didn't saw stuff like that. So, and I think TurboGrafx came out in '89, if I'm not mistaken. So it was roughly around. But the thing about it was with TurboGrafx, that was like a West Coast console, right? So it really wasn't distributed nationwide for the most part. You saw it on the West Coast and some parts of the East Coast. The Central U.S. didn't really get a lot of it, which is why it kind of failed. For me, I would probably say if I could go back and tell my younger self, like, hey, look, take interest in these games because these are really awesome games and you're going to love them, right? They're going to make you a well-rounded gamer. You're going to enjoy the playing time that you're going to have with these. They're going to keep you well entrenched, and they're going to keep you invested. Now there's so many games, right? The backlog is insane as an adult, because now you have the capability to go back and play all the games that you never got to play, or you've played those games and you just want to replay them for the nostalgia piece. It's just different scenarios.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm more along the lines about like how you play games, right? Like when you're playing a game.
Oh,
right.
Well, I mean, for the most part, I'm playing everything modern, right? Like I just beat Hogwarts Legacy, which the game was amazing. I love that game. The game was definitely has replay value, which I'll probably end up going back and playing again under a different house. I mean, I did just pick up a couple of new Neo Geo games for the collection, which I'll drop an unboxing video on the YouTube page for those of you that want to take a look. Those types of games, like the cartridge-based games that I buy, I do tend to try to play them, a couple of times a month, just because, I have all these consoles here. They're not here to just sit there and look at. I want to actually play them. I will say this. Like, out of all the cartridge-based games that I have, I'd probably say my Sega Genesis doesn't get as much love as it should. And I used to play the hell out of my Sega Genesis back in the day. I can remember staying up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with my cousin, and we beat Streets of Rage 2.
Oh,
Man, that was such a huge accomplishment playing. Because that game was surprisingly long from what I can remember. It wasn't like just 2-3 stages and you're done. I mean, we did die quite a bit. But, it is what it is. What would you say for you?
I think that when I was younger, because you didn't have as much access, you didn't have any access to the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was younger, I found myself I played games a lot differently because, for example, like playing through, I remember the first time I played through The Legend of Zelda, the first one, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I, like when I was going through a dungeon, I had paper and I would draw a map through the whole, of rooms. I would draw it out. That way I could remember what rooms I'd been in, where I was. That's all you found the map, right? Or any game like that that involved maps, you would draw, take notes of stuff here and there because it may be important. Whereas now, like, I can just I can Google a map of this area.
YouTube
and
it.
See,
yeah.
Or YouTube it, right? I think that's one of the big ways. I think I maybe thought outside the box a little bit more when I was younger. But then again, to the point, it's because I had a lot more time, right? Like if, it depends on the game. I'll tend to not beat my head against something for too awful long before I just look it up and be like, okay, what is it? Oh, it's this. Okay. Whereas when I was a kid, man, I mean, I would, really spend hours trying to like solve something or figure something out if I didn't have the strategy guide, or even when we had the internet, right? You'd have to go on like GameFAQs, and it was just all text. It was all text.
Yes.
There weren't really any pictures. It was just text. Nope. And you had to they'd be like, all right, go east at the, third statue with the, weird eyeball. And you have to be like, okay, where is that? Okay. Oh, they must be talking about this. Because even, when the internet when we first got the internet, it was still way different than it is now with, the rise of like YouTube and, gaming journalism in a whole is now shifted more to the internet versus magazines, and anybody can be a gaming journalist now on top of that, right?
Yeah.
If you've got an iPhone and 25 minutes, you can be a gaming journalist essentially. Yeah. I mean, you may not be a very good one, but you can be one.
It's easy. And you when you say gaming journalist too, we don't have those early 2000 shows like G4 anymore, right? And they even brought G4 back like a year or so ago, and it just fell flat. No, it didn't work
for that reason, because when G4 was popular, it was really before the rise of YouTube and before the rise of the internet content creator.
Yep.
So they were providing something that was unique. Back when people still watched cable television regularly. Like, I don't even have cable anymore.
Nope.
You know what I mean? So they tried to bring it exactly right, when they tried to bring it back, you're now entering a world where literally there's 40,000 other people on YouTube doing the same thing. So why, outside of maybe a little bit of nostalgia, should I go and watch G4 when I can just watch, a bunch of other gaming journalist YouTubes, or, I can go watch IGN's YouTube, or, any of the tons of other people who cover video games on their YouTube channels, as far as from a video game news perspective and a video game reviews perspective. They just didn't come back with anything fresh. And that's important, I think, in the in the YouTube space now. You really have to have, you really got to come out with a reason for people to watch your show, and then they kind of nuked themselves with the whole crazy Frost rant, and I really won't get into that, but that was kind of a bad moment for them. But yeah, man, I mean, that's a great thing. Well, G4. I mean, my TV used to stay on G4.
Oh, it stayed on it. Like early 2000s, it was always on G4. Yep. Always. Come home from school. It was like I catch the last 15 minutes of Bob Ross on PBS because they'd have him on like right after school. Shout out to Bob Ross. Man. And then right after that, G4 was on, and I had that on for like an hour and a half, just going through it. And then, when homework was done, I was hopping on one of the games, which generally was, I was going over somebody's house right after that. Homework was done, and we were going to go game. So, I mean, that's really all that really consisted of. And you know what? The thing about it is we do have a lot of access to people now that talk about video games. I mean, hell, we're talking about it right now on a podcast, right?
Yep.
And we both have YouTube's different forms of content that wrap around video games. There's thousands others online that are doing the same exact thing. It does point to the fact that, is there a point when things get saturated, right? In terms of that information. Why is it important for us to listen to you, watch this person, play this game? And the real reason of it is that we ran into those same scenarios as gamers before the internet too. It just looked and sounded different, right? Why should I play this game? The box looks amazing, but that doesn't mean the game's going to be good, right? Why should I buy this new console? What is a console war? Why should I buy a Sega Genesis and the same games are on Super Nintendo? Why should I do that? Oh, well, they have a couple of different titles that aren't on Super Nintendo. Oh, this is in the arcade, but this game isn't. Okay. It's just times have changed and they've morphed into such a way that we consume our games differently, right?
Yeah, very much
and the internet, I would just say, has just really escalated and expedited the technology in terms of what we see as an awesome game, a graphically amazing game. I was astonished. Like when I had my wow moment for a game that looked just aesthetically beautiful was Final Fantasy X on PlayStation 2.
Yeah.
Like at the time, it was just visually like imagine them making a Final Fantasy X now remastered. Well, they have it remastered, right?
Yeah, they remastered it.
Remastered. But if we had that same quality that we have now then, and they dropped it, and that was the only game out there that looked that good with the TV quality that we have now, we would have lost our damn minds. And we were already losing our minds with certain games. I mean, hell, Metal Gear Solid looked good back then. I mean, even your 2D games. Your 2D games were really amazing too. It just how we perceive things and how we play games has just really morphed and changed. And I think as we've been gamers for so long, we've just blended and shifted in with that change to where, we complain. We complained about why are they adding DLC? Never had to worry about that with Super Nintendo. Never had to worry about that with Sega Genesis. Never had to worry about that with PlayStation 1, right? And then we got accustomed to it. Why do we have to worry about paying for a battle pass every month? Why do I have to worry about subscribing for this particular game? We complain about that, but we understand now that There's an ongoing business behind the scenes. If you want more content for your game, you're gonna have to pay, because there's people that are creating this, and they got lives too, and they gotta pay. They gotta pay bills and put food on their tables too. This is their livelihood to do so. It took me a while to get that understanding.
Yeah, same. And I think that, because we've seen several like shifts in gaming, right?
Oh yeah.
Where gaming before the internet age, right? You just had single player games or multiplayer games were local. Then we shifted into the kind of the dawning of online games, right? Your first MMOs came out in our lifetime, and now we're starting to see games as a service, right?
Yep.
That Destiny, for example, is a game as a service, essentially, right? It's an ever changing world and game. So I think that is the norm now. And I mean, thinking about it, am I okay with it? Yeah. I mean, do I long for the days of old? Partly, but I still enjoy the convenience that I get now from the internet age of games. Right, being
Oh
able
yeah.
to just download a game and not have to worry about copies being sold out everywhere. Right, even though I like to collect physical copies, I think that just being able to download a game and guarantee that you're going to get it, that you're going to be able to play it as soon as it's live, as soon as the release date is hit, is a good thing. And I think that makes it easier in a lot of ways too on developers, right?
Yeah.
And publishing companies, because you don't have to, your game is going to sell regardless of how many physical copies that you produce, right? Because people are going to download it. I think that we are in an age now where a lot more people are just downloading games instead of going out and buying physical copies. They're just downloading.
I mean, you hit it right there on the nail. Like I think about my daughter for that very reason, right? There was, she'd always wanted to play games because she grew up. I mean, hell, she grew up around us, screaming and cussing and yelling, playing Halo and all that for years when she was young and she could barely form words, could barely talk. She's just grown up around video games her entire life to the point where she is now a gamer, right? She just doesn't play the same games. Like the form factor that these kids have now is a phone, an iPad, a tablet, or a computer, or it could be a console. They have so many different ways to play the same exact game. So if I'm in the room and she's like, "Oh, I'm playing on my Xbox," but we're like, "Hey, we've got a trip that we need to get on. We need to get on the road." Well, guess what? She's just picking her game right back up on her phone, and it's like nothing ever happened. And she's still online talking to her friends, whether that's through Discord or FaceTime or whatever. The game has changed, and these were all things that you and I and others have had conversations over the last 25 years saying, man, wouldn't it be awesome if we could talk to our friend that lives across state? We just moved away, but I wish I could still play a video game with them. Don't have to worry about that anymore. Hell, there's friends that I haven't seen in 15 years, 20 years. Occasionally, they'll pop right back into chat and be like, hey, dude, I'm on the game. Like, whoa, we haven't heard from you in a while. You've been part of those conversations.
Yeah, that's very true.
So the age of the internet has changed things. There are pros and cons. I would definitely and highly say that is a huge pro in terms of saying, like, yes, the way we game now is more convenient. It is easier as long as you have good internet connection. The con is you do miss some of the classic games where you could be solo dolo and grinding it out and having to fight your way to figure out, how do I get past this level? How do I get past this boss? How do I find the secret? Because I will say this. Me going on YouTube or looking at a strategy guide, I got past that event, but I needed assistance. Versus me grinding it out to find it, that is just more self-satisfying to me.
Oh, for sure.
For sure, because like you figured out, you broke the puzzle. You figured out the Da Vinci Code. It's like that's kind of how it feels, right? It's like that.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. I think the I think that we're still in kind of an evolutionary stage with gaming and
Oh yeah,
what the internet does for gaming. I mean, now Xbox is really starting to push cloud gaming, and I've played some games by Xbox Cloud. Works pretty well. Um,
yeah, it
Works
does.
pretty daggum well. I
It
played
does.
through most of, I think it was High on Life by Xbox Cloud, and I was very impressed by how it ran and how well it worked. Even you touched a bit about like having friends and stuff like that that still jump on the game that you haven't talked to in 20 years. I remember a time when meeting people on the internet was very taboo, right?
Oh yeah.
Now it's a normal thing. You have I've seen it on Facebook several times where somebody who they just played games with over the internet, they're meeting each other, they're going to hang out with them in real life, which 15 years ago it was you met that person on the internet, like like what. Now it's just like normal. More and more people are building relationships, whether they be romantic or friendships, like via online activities. And I think
Well,
a lot of those online activities are gaming. You know what I mean?
look at our scenario right here. Like me and this guy right here used to work together, right? We used to work together, and we used to talk about video games in passing because he worked overnights, and I had the evening shift at the job that we worked at. And it could be 30, 45 minutes in passing, but we were talking about video games, and we forever talked about hopping on Xbox, playing Halo 3, and doing that. It just never happened. Well, I graduated college, I got promoted, I moved to a different location, or just a different store location, and I end up, managing the people overnight when I moved to an overnight management role myself, and met a bunch of individuals that like to play video games. Well, those conversations first started with, Elliot, you don't know how to play a game. You don't know how to play. We'll beat you. I'm like, you don't understand who you're talking to. I may be your boss. I might be slightly young. But get your ass kicked playing with me. I'll wear y'all out. So trash talk commenced for half the break, and they said, okay, let's do this. Let's hop on. We'll give you some time to practice since you haven't played in a while. I was like, yeah, man,
How nice of them.
I was like, I don't need practice. Like, y'all, let's play Halo 3. Like, oh, we'll destroy you. I was like, I'll tell you what, I'll murder all 6 of y'all in Halo 3. 6v1. I just get to pick the stage. That's all I request. Let me pick the stage. That's it. That's all I request. But I go back to my old store, and I just happen to run into. I'm like, bro, dude, got folks in my store talking mad trash about Halo 3. He's like, what? I was like, man, you down? He's like, man, I've been down. We've been talking about this forever.
Yeah.
So gamer tags get lit up. 2 days later, we're all in this game. He's he's literally a spectator this first round because they were talking so much trash. And I bodied all 6 of them. It was so bad. But getting to this point about meeting people online, one of my former employees happens to be his now current wife.
Yep.
So I actually introduced them playing video games. And over the years, when they finally got married, they had people in the wedding, that I had been playing video games with for years. Never met them in person until the wedding. And it was like a long lost family member. It wasn't shaking hands. Oh, it's nice to meet you in person. It was straight hugs, kisses, all of that. Yeah. It was straight family because we had real life conversations for years online. Every single day that we played together, it wasn't just, oh, this is someone I play with online. Like, no, we're having real life conversations about everything. They know secrets. They know trials and tribulations. They know the happy things. These are things that happen in the age of internet that we can't say happen just playing, old school 20 years ago. It's very rare that you would ever hear of a scenario like that. But now we hear more scenarios like, hey, I just met this person online. We've been playing for the last 2 years, and another perfect example, my daughter meets one of her friends playing Roblox. her parents come down here to visit another family member, but they knew that we lived here, and boom, straight up,
Yeah.
we met them for dinner. And then when we went to go travel to New York last year, we met them when we went up there. So it's just funny how gaming kind of brings people together now.
Yeah. And as much as we kind of, we kind of, I don't want to say bag on it, but we talk about the good old days. I do think that the evolution of gaming in the internet age has been overall a very positive thing
Yeah.
for gaming, and I think that it will continue to evolve. You know what I mean? Who knows what we'll be talking about in the next 10 years from the gaming space? I mean, I think that with technology the way it is today, the rise of things like virtual reality, cloud gaming, I really think that the game console as we know it is going to be radically different in the next 5 to 10 years.
I don't know, man. I don't know about the virtual reality stuff.
You gotta try it, man. It's fun. It's
Man,
fun.
the motion sickness just gets me, bro.
Oh yeah.
It just it that's why I just if I didn't have that issue, and I think we kind of briefly talked about in episode 0, where I mean that's kind of like one of those hereditary traits that I picked up from my mom, unfortunately, is like when I play certain games, I mean, hell, even first person shooters like Halo, Destiny, Warframe, like just games like that, it I have to make my body get accustomed to playing those games so I don't get sick playing them. Right? So I can only like when I first play a really Jason Bourne style shaky first person shooter or whatever, I have to really like take my time, like spend an hour or two, and then gradually start working my way up if we're putting in like some all nighters or something like that. But man, my experience with virtual reality, bro, it's been like 10-15 minutes. I'm done.
Yeah. I think as it continues to evolve, I think that that's going to be virtual reality in like an online space. I think is going to be a big thing in the next 10 years. I think. I don't know. Who knows? It could be something completely different. But all right, man. I think we're gonna wrap this one up. But
oh yeah,
let's talk a little bit about what we're gonna talk about next time, man. Next time, I think we're gonna talk a little bit about GameStop.
My goodness!
Next episode.
The GameStop?
The GameStop.
Not Babbage's, but GameStop.
Babbage's, GameStop. A lot of people like to bag on GameStop, but we're going to go a little bit of a different direction with it. But we'll save that for episode 2. So, man, Ellie, where can we find you on the socials, man?
You can find me on YouTubeich, the YouTubeich at Retro Neo Ness. I try to pump a couple of new videos every week. And then you can also find me on Instagram at Retro Neo Ness, same name. And I really just post pictures of recent pickups, just the worthy stuff, none of the really, random stuff. But a lot of my big pickups I throw on Instagram. So you can find me in those 2 places.
And of course, you can find me on all the socials at Zelda Head Guy. It's the same anywhere you look. If there's a Zelda Head Guy on a social, it's probably me. So follow me there. But we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Thanks for watching and listening, and we will see you in the next one.